I'm Claire Parker.
And I'm Ashley Hamilton.
And this is Celebrity Memoir Book Club,
the podcast where we take a book off the shelf and we say, this has too much filter on it. So we re-say it in a way that is both filtered through our mouths and also unfiltered. And Claire, if you were to write a memoir, they call you Claire.
Yeah.
And you've got hair.
So true. No, sorry, I fucked it up. That was me. That was my dumb brain that said do something different.
And if you were to write a memoir, what's a story that would go from last week?
Yeah. Okay. I actually have one from today and I'm furious.
Okay.
If you guys know anything about me and Ashley, it's we're obsessed with transportation safety. We love public transportation. We love safe streets. We're all about daylighting.
Oh my God. Can I say, whichever one of you met my friend Kevin from Make McGinnis Safe and said, oh, I'm already well researched on daylighting and street safety, bike lanes, anti-car establishments. I love you.
Okay. So today I was biking from Bed-Stuy to Williamsburg because I had to go get my final 1099. For those of you at home wondering what the date is, it is April 15th. So it was quite urgent.
Great.
Anyway, I had to go back and get it from my old apartment. And the fastest way to get there is to bike. My other alternative is to drive, but there's no real public transportation from south to north. So I'm biking, and there is one incredible lane that goes along Bedford from point A to point B perfect, except for in the middle, there's a little neighborhood that does not respect bikes. They don't respect bikes at all, and they're very car dependent. So I'm biking, and suddenly you hit this neighborhood, and everyone is parked in the bike lane, which forces me to swerve into the car lanes where the cars are lurching, okay? Start, stop. They're acting crazy. They're unpredictable, and they're not looking to the left because, according to them, to the left, there's nothing. There's just parked cars
because they don't believe in bikes.
But actually, there's little Claire Parker just trying to go do her taxes. As always, you guys know my biggest fear in the world is taxes.
Both evasion and not evasion. I think paying them is scary, and I think not paying them is scary.
Every aspect of the IRS fears me in terms of gives me the fear. Anyway.
I wish they would fear us.
So I almost get hit twice. And I'm stopped at a light waiting for my turn to go. And I look to my left and what do I see but two cops? And we are literally just a sea of illegally parked vehicles. And they both have traffic vests on. So I turn to them and I go, hey, is it legal for people to be parked in the bike lanes? And they go, no, they could get ticketed. And I go, oh, okay. Are you guys going to ticket them? Because there's a lot of cars and I keep almost getting hit. And they were like, no, that has to be done by either a traffic agent or by a cop. And I go, oh, what are you guys? And they're like, what? And I'm like, what are you guys? Are you not a traffic agent or a cop? And they go, yeah, we're cops, but we can't do anything because we're from a different precinct. And then I go, oh, so what are you doing here? Because they're just standing there, presumably doing nothing. And they go, well, we were hired here today to help with the traffic. And I said, oh, well, it would help me if you did the traffic laws. And they're like, we can't do that. So then I'm like, well, what are you doing? But I said it on my breath because I'm afraid.
Oh my God. I swear to fucking God, on this, the day of our Lord taxes Christ, they're out here using our tax dollars to fuck around.
And so it's just crazy that they're like, yeah, we're here to help with traffic. And I'm like, here's something that's actually just risked my life. Twice my life has been endangered immediately. There's a way that you could help it. Anyway, so then the light turns. So I'm like, okay, bye. And I go to bike away and they go, you could call 311 and lodge a complaint. And I'm like, I'm coming to the authorities right this minute.
Lodging
to people who have been hired to help with it. Anyway, this is what kills me. So I go, okay. And I go to start biking away. And as I'm biking away, they go, stay safe. I can't. I just asked you for help and you wouldn't. I'm literally not safe because you refused to help me. Thank God Ashley was not there because she would be in jail this minute and there would never be a podcast again. Ashley would have gone to jail so bad.
I would have gone to jail so bad. You know, a big problem with me, a big problem with my ass is that I don't watch my goddamn mouth.
People think I'm the crazy bitch.
I have a real problem with authority.
Ashley's insane. She makes me nervous. As her boss/employee, half the time, boss time, I'm nervous.
Okay, I understand that occasionally in my fit of anger, I'm a bit wrong, but am I ever at the wrong guy?
No. But unfortunately, there's no justice in this society,
so I'm all we have.
Anyway, Ashley, If you were to write a memoir, what would last week's chapter be called? What would you talk about? What would the story be?
Okay. I don't want to go into detail, but I'm prepared to join the 4B movement in Korea. I am so sick of dudes. This is the opposite of what I said in the episode we recorded last week that actually won't air for a few weeks, but I'm fucking over it, man.
What's the 4B movement?
That's the one where they're like, we actually don't need men to live.
It's so true, though. It's just me and Bug.
I just feel like I have so much fun in my life. It is such a beautiful sunny day, and I walked around with my dog, and the way she like glistens in the sunlight, she was so happy. She was beaming ear to ear, and I was just like, why are we texting any motherfuckers?
Absolutely. All the drama comes from one group.
Last night, it was just like a completely innocuous thing, and I was driven to rage by someone just acting a fucking fool, and for what? Nothing. So that's the story from my memoir this week.
And if you want the details, I guess you'll have to buy the book.
My life as a spinster, happily.
Can I tell you, do you remember that era of my life where I was just spinning in a chair all the time?
Yes.
I was happiest days of my life.
I would love to just spin with my pals.
We should reclaim spinster and make it when you're on a tire swing with your friends, having the time of your fucking life.
Exactly. Who wouldn't want to be a spinster?
Or when you're in one of those carnival rides with the centrifugal force where you're like locked up against a wall, but in a delightful way.
Those spinsters never not spinning.
Yeah. Those spinsters, they'll probably get cotton candy next because they're at a carnival. That's life.
The dream.
So this week we're doing Paulina Porizkova, who is somebody you may not know, which is a bit funny because there's definitely a chapter in this book about fame and how she's always been famous and always will be famous. And I was like, well, not to me, but to somebody, I'm sure.
Also, I feel like she did have a pretty intense tabloid moment. I think she was a pretty big model.
No, and I definitely think like my mom would recognize her. But the thing about fame is unless you're working so hard at it, people live and die.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? I'm not saying that the people who knew you forgot you, but the thing about generations is they come and they go.
Totally. And they always have a name that I can't quite recall.
Yeah.
Okay, so Paulina Porizkova was a top model in the 80s who later ventured into acting and writing. She's written a novel and more recently some essays that have gone a bit viral about beauty and aging. She was married for 30 years to Rick Ocasek, the lead singer of The Cars. He also had a solo career, and then he became a major music producer. And their romance was like very buzzy in the 80s, like top model and top rock star. It was a big deal. And the first chapter of this book really like turns that look at her personal life on its head, which I mean is what the whole memoir should do, of course. But I feel like I got hit by a truck with this first chapter.
Okay, so she prefaces it with, years ago, I sat across from a journalist, a young woman, as she pulled out her phone to record our conversation. As we talked, she loosened up and said laughingly, yeah, my publisher said, let's get Paulina Porizkova for this. She has no filter and will say anything. No filter, say anything. This is how others thought of me. She takes a bit of umbrage because she says that means that I don't hold other people's secrets close. And she's like, I do. If you've ever told me a secret, I will keep it to myself. But I try to be authentic and honest and use my platform to tell the stories of my life. And she plans to do so in this book. And she's like, of course, in my life, there have been other people who have affected it, and I try not to infringe upon their privacy. But she's like, you know, if you have a husband for 35 years, that's going to be important. So her husband at the time of writing this book had just died. So she says, listen, of course, he can't defend himself, but this is my truth. Take it or leave it.
And I would love if he could defend himself. So she gives the once over in this intro chapter where she says he died. They were still technically married at the time of death, although they'd been separated for 2 years. They still lived together, and she still considered them best friends. She had a boyfriend who was integrated in their lives. Her boyfriend knew their kids, her husband. They were all just kind of in each other's lives. And a few weeks before his death, which came as a surprise, he revised his will and wrote her out of it entirely. So not only was she grieving the loss of this close friend and partner of 30 plus years, she also had been like financially thrown for a fucking loop. Everything they had was intertwined, and she had been completely written out.
He was able to do this legally by saying that she abandoned him, which is a legal clause which says that you have not been able to reach your wife physically, spiritually, like by letter for over a year. They had at the time of his death literally been living together so that she could help him after his most recent surgery.
Yeah, she found his body.
So for him to say that she abandoned him is crazy. And also, like, if they had gotten divorced, it was going to be 50-50. But for him to die and claim abandonment, She got nothing.
So she was grieving. A huge part of her life has been undergoing enormous grief and also this feeling of betrayal and having to then go to court to get money.
So she opens with the crying lady on Instagram, and she's at this club, the opening of a new private club in Lower Manhattan, feeling like I'd crashed a party when she goes to the bathroom and this drunk 30-year-old is like, wait, I know who you are. You're the lady who cries on Instagram.
And she was waiting for this girl to be like, yes, you're that supermodel. And she was like, yes, it's me. And then she was like, oh, yep, I do cry on Instagram.
And then she gets into a quick overview of her life, which actually is fascinating. I was writing this book, I was like, oh, you were right. You have had an interesting life and you deserve to write a memoir. She has been famous almost her entire life because when she was a young girl, she became the face of political prisoners of the Soviet Union. Her parents had escaped Czechoslovakia and then not been able to return back to collect their young daughter after they had moved to Sweden. So then they did this hunger protest in front of the embassy, and they became like headline news. They became the refugees of the USSR, unable to see their daughters. At one point, her mom snuck back into the country with a fake passport and wig, where she was apprehended as a political prisoner. She was thrown in jail for years and then put on home arrest. I mean, at one point, the Swedish hockey team would not play the USSR hockey team out of political protest, and they would send photographers to her apartment every week. She was like a real...
like a beacon of politics.
Yes. She was the face of the evil communists.
When she was in elementary school, she told her friend, like, oh, I'm busy on Sundays because of the photographers that come on Sundays. And her friend was like, what are you talking about? She thought that was just a part of life, that on Sundays the news comes to check on you and see how their little ward is doing.
And then at 15, she moves to Paris to become a model, where she becomes hugely successful right out the gate. But just as when I was a child, I discovered that when I was most seen, I felt the least heard. So when social media emerged, I, like many other of my generation, was intrigued but baffled by it. At first, Instagram was a bit of a shock. Every post had to be visual. As I had been a model since I was 15, posing for photos was my job. But I never actually created them. I never actually got to choose which of them got published. So then for the first time, she feels like she's able to share what she thinks, and she's so excited to be able to control her own image.
And then her husband dies, and she decides to go full no filter. She decides to share her grief and sometimes my anger. I posted makeup-free selfies. I wrote about the pain, and on few occasions, I posted photos of myself crying.
They said that the kind of self-absorption I had to have to take a photo of myself crying and then post it made me either a narcissist or pathetic. I will tell you why I posted those crying selfies. I did want empathy. I did want compassion. I was desperate to connect with someone, anyone. I was crushed by the loneliness and isolation because pain is a deserted island. My tearful selfies are the message in the bottle I tossed in the water in an attempt to be heard. I've never heard anyone just be like, yeah, you're right. I wanted attention. I was sad and I needed to connect. And something I think about all the time is something I heard recently is that the internet and social media specifically is one of the last free, like, third spaces. Yeah. And I think when you think of it in that lens, not that it's better, but it's a lot more understandable that, like, it's so hard to find a community these days, and it's so hard to be somewhere, especially in the pandemic, where quite literally you could not leave your house and be around other people. That, like, how do you scratch that itch and that deep human desire to be heard and connected and seen?
Especially because it gives us, like you said, such an opportunity to do so. It is such an interesting thing that people will write so negatively about someone's post on the internet and be like, oh, you're just doing this for attention. Of course. Like, what kind of attention, though? Some people just want to be seen and heard. It doesn't have to be like
some people
a
just want to
showy,
connect.
like, look at me, I need attention. Some people feel so lonely that they're looking for attention from somewhere, from anywhere, and there is this free platform where you can post to the internet and get attention.
Who doesn't want attention in any way?
Yeah.
You don't have one friend. You don't have a parent. You don't have a kid. You don't have a neighbor. You just sit alone in your house. That's crazy.
Totally. And then this woman was very moved by her crying post. She loved the crying lady on Instagram.
She said, my friends tell me to bottle up, not to make a fool of myself, but sometimes, you don't feel so great. So why do I have to keep pretending everything is fine? I want to thank you, she said, for sharing your pain, for being real. Because, if you can do that, be real and all, then why can't I?
This woman had given me the best compliment of my life. After all the years of being seen, I was finally heard.
So I really liked that. And this started me out on this book of liking her. And I ended liking her. I liked this book.
There were a couple little moments where I said, this one wasn't my favorite essay. And there are, I think, always spaces that people haven't finished their thoughts on it yet. And you're like, well, it is published now, though. But I think that, first of all, the structure of these essays is extremely well done. She's a good writer.
She's a good writer, and they're nice, and they're short, and they're to the point, and they're not trying to bite off more than they can chew.
Yeah.
And I feel that they're very honest but considered.
And some of them are very beautifully written, but it doesn't feel like she was trying so hard to be like, how do I make this sound writerly? She just is a pretty good writer.
So this next essay is called We Were Always Called Girls. And it starts off with one of her first gigs as a model. It's like her fourth one in Paris. And she's getting her makeup done. And in comes the photographer.
And he just puts his dick on her shoulder.
The room went silent except for a pop of an umbrella flash followed by a high-pitched whine as the photo assistant tested the equipment nearby. The makeup artist moved aside a little and laughed. Her laughter assured me that this was funny. I joined in giggling, although I had no idea what I was laughing at. And so she doesn't even know what's happening at first. She just feels something and can smell. She's like, what is going on?
I had never seen a real penis before and certainly not held up next to my face. Could it be?
He grinned at me as if this was a fun little joke. The makeup artist shook her head lightly and raised her eyebrows as if to say, here he goes again. I wanted to jump up and get away from it, but with another woman laughing, I thought my impulse must be wrong. Her laughter made the whole thing seem lighthearted, inconsequential, like I'd ruin the fun if I didn't laugh along. I kept smiling. I needed them to like me.
If it wasn't the photographer or the client or the nephew of a client or one of the client's friends, it happened so often, it just became another day on a shoot. In fact, if a photographer was well known for being creepy and didn't try something, I'd feel uneasy and insecure.
Now, as a 57-year-old woman, it's not lost on me that the sexualized ideal woman you saw on the covers of magazines 40 years ago did not know a penis when it was literally pulled out right in front of her face, because the ideal woman is not a woman at all. She was a girl.
And modeling careers start young and often end young. When you were taught the rules as a child, you don't question them. I was told models had to be young because their smooth skin reflects light in a face that older faces did not. But I suspect there's another darker reason for having 17-year-olds hawking anti-wrinkle creams.
All models were and still are called girls, regardless of age. Why? Why are there no women in modeling? Because a girl doesn't know to say no.
The danger isn't just in setting up the impossible beauty standard, it's in what the standard represents and the demands of women, which is that they not only look like girls but act like them too. If the ideal woman is 17, then the ideal woman is naive, malleable, inexperienced, and undiscerning. The ideal woman is not a woman, she is a girl.
This really, I liked a lot, and it was succinct and it was to the point, and I think it really touched on everything I've been feeling about the anti-aging obsession right now online and on TikTok and in the skin forums and stuff, because it goes beyond any reasonable amount of, oh, I would like to be attractive, or oh, like I would like to be preventative. It's so consuming in the same way that I think eating disorders were for our generation. And that if you subscribe to what their belief system is, like you will ruin your own life. So it makes you wonder, what is the point? I don't know. I just feel like they're obsessed with looking young in a way that goes beyond even looking attractive. It's like youth for the sake of youth. They never stop to ask why. Why is it so important that you look like you've never experienced anything?
Yeah, and I think it gets to the point where they aren't experiencing things. There was a girl that we were sending each other on TikTok the other day who was talking about obsessive avoidance of the sun because of aging qualities, not because of any sort of skin cancer concern. Like it was really just not wanting to physically look older. And so then she wasn't experiencing things. Like you don't live your life when you're always concerned about like what might accidentally lend to a little bit of extra aging. And I feel like it's also what we were talking about on the Patreon recently with like the burden of fitting into the ideal, where once it's been diagnosed, it's like almost a moral failing to not try to fix it. This obsession with anti-aging isn't just in people's own lives. They're not just keeping it for themselves. They're telling you like you should do this. Otherwise, you're failing to exist within the rules that we've created for our society.
I don't know. I feel like I've been joking about this before, but the obsession with looking so young for what? How are you being treated at 24 that you want to last forever? And when you really get down to it, this idea that people are just taking hook, line, and sinker, the best thing you can do on earth is look 17. Look at 17-year-olds. Are they being treated the way you want to be treated?
I mean, that's why this essay was so great, because it's like, look at 17-year-olds. They are being sexually harassed and they don't know they're allowed to say no.
That's what's so hot about a 17-year-old. Not that they're objectively better looking. A lot of times they haven't even figured out their eyebrows yet. They're not better looking. They're just more malleable. So why are you so desperate to try to look like somebody who doesn't know themselves?
Yeah.
And get a grip on it. This next essay is called Beauty and the Beast, and it's about when she started dating Rick, how do you say it? Ocasek. And they're in a grocery store, and she's famous, but he's very famous. And she opens up a magazine, and there they are, Beauty and the Beast. That's what they've been labeled by the magazine. And she's so upset. And she's like, why are they allowed to say that?
And he says, I don't think you're a beast.
We comforted each other by convincing ourselves that the two of us were shiningly, perfectly, blindingly better than all those who dared criticize us. We had a perfect view from the top of the mountain. So what if the top of the mountain was a bit windy, a bit lonely? We needed no one else. And that was a good thing, for no one else could possibly climb up to meet us with all the rocks we were throwing down at them.
So this was so interesting. This chapter was about the way that they were scrutinized as a famous couple. And she says, being judged did not teach me to be non-judgmental. On the contrary, it made me more critical. Being judged made me sharper, meaner. It felt like such a heavy burden of judgment that I tried to balance the scales by judging others instead of acknowledging that it was the scale itself that was the problem. And she talks about how as a couple, they were judgy assholes who isolated themselves. And I found this so fascinating because I feel like no one will admit this. It is a hard thing to do when people are just being so mean to you at random all the time. It takes a lot of practice to like not fire back with extra anger and to not like build up extra anger inside, to really like fully release it separately in the world. That's what I loved about this book, is she's able to be like, I was a huge bitch for a long time. She says it extended into their personal lives, like everywhere. They were just kind of isolated and mean with each other.
And then one day she's on a movie set and a very famous actor kept making a real effort to hang with the crew, from the Teamsters to the electricians to craft services. Everyone loved him. The set was an ego explosion, but in the midst of a roiling ocean of battling personalities, he was an island of calm. By being kind to the people around him, he made his little slice of the world better. And she says the idea came in and she's like, I didn't really actually start practicing this until after the divorce and the grief, but this is a learned skill and I have by no means perfected it. It's difficult and I struggle with it sometimes. I still have my bitchy moments, but I agree with my husband. I am no beast.
It reminded me of Gabrielle Union's book a little bit, where people just take for granted kindness. It is a practiced skill that you have to work on. And especially when you're in a place where you are treated in a way that feels like very specific and other, to work on bringing positivity into your world and the world around you is like an effort.
Yeah.
That is ultimately what you should strive for, but it's not something that comes naturally, like instinctually to a lot of people, I think.
Unlike us, who's perfect.
No, I think we've like made a lot of effort over the last year to be nicer people.
Yeah, and it does free you. I think ultimately it is helpful for yourself, because when you're so judgmental of other people, you stop yourself from trying. Do you know what I mean? When you make fun of other people, you're like putting limits on what you will allow yourself to do.
And I think we're far, far, far from perfect, but I do think we've both made a lot of efforts, and I think that we are different than we were 3 years ago. And I found that very inspiring, especially that she was like, I didn't even put this into practice until my late 50s.
Childhood. Where is my home? Where is my home is the opening line of the Czech national anthem. So she was raised by her grandmother for most of her young childhood, and that's what she considers the happiest time of her life, and that's when she considers herself home.
Her parents left when she was, I think, 3 years old to go to Sweden, and they were going to come back for her in Czechoslovakia, but they were not able to. The borders had been closed after they left. So then it was just her and her grandma, and she didn't end up moving to Sweden until she was 9.
And then the day she moved to Sweden, they're like in the hotel driving back. She hears her dad tell her mom that he wants a divorce.
Yeah.
They broke up the night. Which at first I was like, that is crazy. Why couldn't he wait till the next day? But then I put it together that
her mom had been back in Czechoslovakia with them for 3 years.
Yeah, so he had obviously lived this other life and then had to reunite with her and be like, by the way, it's over.
Yeah.
But still, maybe you wait for breakfast or for the kids to be out of the room.
Jesus Christ.
So then she interjects with a memory of a conversation she had with a therapist at a party one time when she was in her 40s. When you put a paper and pen before a child and ask them to draw a house, all of them will draw the little square with the triangle roof, the door in the middle, and 2 windows on the side. A chimney. Now this child needs to inhabit this house. It's where the child belongs. There are no other options. So imagine this child walking to the house to get home, and the front door is closed, locked. The child can't get in. Well, then the child will try to use the right window. If it's locked too, the child will try the left window. If that's locked, the child will try any other option, even the chimney. Once the child has learned that the chimney is the way into the house, this will always be their entrance. It doesn't matter that it takes a lot longer, that it's dangerous and inconvenient. It doesn't even matter if the front door and the windows are later flung open. The child will always choose the chimney. In that moment, I realized I'd been taking the chimney into the house for most of my life. In the house I built, I had not even bothered to install a front door.
I've been beating myself up for most of my life because I couldn't find the right way in as a child. Everyone has pointed this out to me, that my way to get in is wrong and the most complicated way possible, but the truth is that my childhood house with Bobby was filled with love, and my married home with Rick was filled with love too. It's true I may have built a staircase to the chimney, not the world's most practical solution, but my hard-to-access house nevertheless was filled with love. So she has experienced a lot of complicated love in her life, but it is what she knows. The way in which we learned as children may be impractical, but it can get you to where you belong.
And so she says, like, her idea of unconditional love was very complicated by the fact that first her parents abandoned her when she was 3, or like according to her experience, she felt abandoned. And then when she was 9, she was taken from the only home she's ever known. And when she was taken to Sweden, they were like, oh, this will be so much better for you. But she missed home so much and she never got to see her grandmother again. And so now, like, the only person she's known as a steady, unconditional presence in her life has been taken from her also. She's also then moved to this home where her little brother is now being born. And her mom is distracted and her dad is with somebody else. And there's a divorce. And so she feels alone for kind of the rest of her life. And she says Rick, ironically, shares qualities with all 3 of her parents, both her father and mother and her grandmother, who she sees as a primary parent. And so she's like, I kind of found the perfect guy. I think what I liked is I was reading my friend Tell the Bees Substack recently, and he was talking about how millennials love this idea that every problem in life can be named, outsourced, fixed. And that's part of our obsession with therapy. Of course, like, it's great to go to therapy and work through your problems, but there is this fantasy we all have that if you went to therapy, you'd get fixed.
Yeah.
As opposed to this idea that, like, your well-being is this ongoing practice of trying to make yourself better for yourself and others, kind of. And she says, and chimneys can be beautiful too. Even if they're harder to access, there's still a way in, my way in. Just because you use the chimney as a front door doesn't mean that you won't be happy and feel joy and love. It just means you need to climb. And I think there's something where she's like, I went to therapy in my 50s and tried to work on myself, and somebody really pointed out all these things to me. But you are who you are. At some point, you can't be fixed as a person. You just are that person, and it's okay. It's okay to be who you are. We're all different, and that's good.
Yeah, and I was going to say, I feel like there is this misinterpretation also of bettering yourself, that it's like this constant obsessive self-improvement thing, when really it's just like, what little things in your life can you do to like make life better for you and your community? It's not like this obsessive routines and like becoming a completely different person overnight and like a forever striving to be a higher self. It's not like Huberman optimization. It's day-to-day happiness optimization. I think the thing I really liked about this book is that it is like steadfast in its growth. Like, there are definitive statements. There is like a start and end to a lot of these stories, but there's always like this open-endedness of still figuring things out. And there's not any like negative connotation to that.
No, I agree. Later, she says, she talks about going to therapy and getting medicated for anxiety. And she says, I am an anxious person in the same way that I am a person with blue eyes, in the same way that I'm a person who likes to read books. Like, that is a part of me. But there is a limit where if it's impacting your life to an extreme, you don't have to live that way.
Yeah.
But she's never going to be carefree. And that's just what makes her who she is.
Okay. So then she talks about meeting Rick. And he drops a line where I say, I get why you let him date you in secret for 3 years when he had a wife and children.
Ugh.
Okay. So she sees him in a music video on MTV and it's like, that guy is hot.
He seemed so confident, also awkwardly beautiful in his movements. There was a moment of close-up of his face in which for a fraction of a second I detected a smile, a hesitant smile of a vulnerable little boy. That's what really got me. Jesus.
So then
he was 40.
I love him. It's problematic. I understand. So then she's doing a music video and she's with the band and then they're like, hold on, we're waiting for Rick. And out he walks and she's like, okay, I'm going to marry him. She was like freaking out and says, don't pay any attention if I'm faint. I'm just nervous. Without even taking his eyes off my face, he gently touched my knee. If you faint, I'll catch you. Bitch.
He had caught me and held me and he continued to hold me, keeping me safe for the next 25 years.
I'm sorry. Did that not get you?
Not really.
Okay. Everywhere I looked, there he was. So she's obsessed with him. She has such a crush on him and he's also in a massively popular band. So she literally is seeing him everywhere. I felt like I knew him already. Their initial romance was very hot and heavy, but he was also married. At one point, she's like, tell me a secret. And he was like, I have a wife. And she's like, fuck.
I left my boyfriend and moved in with a girlfriend. I expected Rick to do the same. It wasn't until a few months passed of me pressing him to leave his wife that he told me there was some children. Oof. Second secret. Being a child of divorced parents, I could not brush this off easily. I tried to break off the relationship, but I couldn't. So then they just started like having an affair in secret. And she kept being like, you have to leave your wife. And he kept being like, I don't want to abandon my children when they're so young like I did last time.
When he abandoned his first wife and their children.
How ironic that he would be like, my wife abandoned me. Sir, I think it's opposite day.
Our understanding of love was the same. Our relationship was filled with pain and beauty, and I thought that was proof of its depth.
He had told me another secret before we got married. He was actually 4 years older than he initially told me, making him 21 years older than me. They met when she was 19 and he was 40. This was heartbreaking to me. He adored me so much he was insecure about his age. Of course he had lied. He didn't want to risk losing me. As if those 4 years made a difference in my love for him. She also said that she loved like what a good father he was, that he didn't want to abandon those second group of kids.
I think that's so good for a dad to not want to abandon his kids, even if he eventually does.
Well, also because he's like, I don't want to abandon group 2 of children the way I abandoned group 1. And what she did, I guess, ultimately do.
But it seems like he did not abandon group 3, and you can't say the same for Caitlyn Jenner.
That's so true. Fool me thrice. Shame on her.
Our understanding of love was the same. Our relationship was filled with pain and beauty, and I thought that was proof of its depth. I became his obsession. For the first time in my life, I felt wholly desired. His insistence on the two of us always being together made me feel safe, for I believed a man who loved me this fully would never abandon me. Eventually, she says they had no friends, just each other, and she thought this was cool.
Even though so many of the years of being with my husband were wonderful, I've come to understand I'm no longer content with being an object of beauty, even if it's a precious one. I'm no longer a girl whose fear of abandonment will make her acquiesce to whatever her lover needs. I'm a woman who's lived through betrayal and grief and heartache, a woman who knows her strength. What I need and want is love, real love. Adoration may be where it begins, like the foamy top of a beer, but love is the deeper substance underneath, the golden effervescent beer under the foam.
Rick and I spent so much time whipping each other up into foamy adoration, we had no time for anything else. Both of our careers suffered. We had no friends, but we were consumed with sweet clouds of bubbles. I will say, what would his career have been? I don't think his career suffered.
I guess when he was in his 50s, he wasn't a little rock boy anymore.
Yeah, and then at that point, he went on to produce some of the greatest albums of the 90s.
Yeah, but he could have also done twice that. I mean, I guess you're right. Like, I guess it really was just her. She's saying our careers suffered, but she means hers.
Yeah, maybe he toured less and instead stayed home to become like an award-winning producer. I mean, at 40, he might have just not wanted to be on the road as much. At 32, I'm like, traveling is a little bit hard.
Maybe by kid 6, he was like, ugh, I got to see one of these things grow up. Much like Joanna Gaines. Remember when Joanna Gaines, like, you got to have 5 kids so that you can finally see one of them learn to talk. It's so crazy.
I wish I'd done it 5 more times, but when would I have had the chance?
When I wanted to delve deeper, he couldn't recognize what I was offering. Rick never did appreciate the slight bitterness of beer.
Did you know he produced the Blue album?
I did, from this book.
Oh, she talks about it in the book. Okay.
That's Ashley's favorite album.
I love the Blue
and
album.
She's going to go see them tour on September 10th.
11th. Never forget. Okay, so she is like freaky into psychics. And for a good reason, because it seems that they've gotten every single thing right. And I can't tell if she's actually just been to a fuck ton of psychics. And so at some point, everyone has said one sentence that turned out correct. And she can really put them together into one correct psychic statement. Or if she has met some freaky deaky psychics who psychicked into her life really good.
Yeah, and then she kind of gets on to how she went to a past life person when she was in the depths of her despair after the death and divorce. And they said, like, all of your past lives, you've had so much pain, but you've learned. And she's like, that's helpful because when you're in pain, at least it feels like you might learn something from it. I kept relying on fireflies to light my room instead of using their faint glow to look around for better sources of light. That's hope. A firefly is hope. When each firefly died, I had to catch another. Yes, I was desired by men again, but they were all just fireflies, the sparks. Sparks which led me to finding the candle that shed light on finding my new purpose at this stage of my life, which is what I actually needed all along, the realization that I am the candle. Okay, so then she has this interesting essay about height, which I guess is the only way a model, somebody who was actually considered at one point in her life to be the most beautiful woman in the world, can say she feels insecure.
Yeah.
It's the only one where I'm like, I'll give it to you. I've been the tall girl, and you guys know it traumatized the fuck out of me.
Okay, I feel like people think that I hate on short people out of nowhere, but it really feels like it was definitely a trauma response to just being a tall girl. Not a trauma response, but you know what I mean?
I know. I just said it too. I'm just like laughing.
And I think she did a really good job in this essay, even if I'm like, okay, this is not obviously a numero uno struggle.
But to her it was, because she had a perfect face.
To her it was, and I felt like she really beautifully illustrated what sucks so much about being tall, and it's because it's like the antithesis of what we're taught as femininity.
And she's like, every time you see a tall woman with a short man and people go, he must be very brave, like he's very like confident, and be like, no, she's confident too, because you don't know what it's like to go around feeling bigger than people.
Height and femininity were opposites. They could not coexist. I believed that to be tall meant that you could not be feminine. A man is supposed to tower over the woman he chooses to be with. It's an immediate visible sign that he is more than the woman. The world assumes men should be taller than women. And then she dates a short guy, 5'7", and she's 5'11". And he thought that being tall would make her confident. And she's like, no, I'm so insecure about being tall. And they both learn. She's like, okay, short guys have feelings too. And he's like, wow, tall bitches have feelings too. It's a beautiful moment for them all. And then she dates someone who's like, actually, it's great that you're tall. And she's like, oh my God, really? After years of being paid to be beautiful and tall, finally she's like, oh my God, actually it is awesome about me.
And then she has an essay about how when she was living in Sweden, she was like actually very badly bullied, like bullied terribly and called ugly and like beat up a lot by other girls. And so one summer she worked really hard so that she could have a summer job so she could buy like the cute little jeans that everybody else was wearing. And she went into 9th grade being like, well, now I've got them. What are they going to say? I'm not wearing the jeans they're wearing. And of course, they all did come in and call her a whore. And then they actually swirlied her in the toilet.
This was tough stuff.
Old school, good old fashioned bullying. Take note, Real Housewives of Beverly Hills. This is bullying, is getting your head put in a toilet and swirlied. In that moment, she was like, I guess money can't buy you class. Elegance is learned. No, she said, I guess money can't buy you popularity. But that's not true. Let me tell you something. That's not really true.
Yeah, but she says money can't solve all your problems. She originally saw money as hope, and then when she got swirlied, she said money actually isn't magic.
I will say this was actually the wrong lesson because of this moment, she goes on to never really consider or care about her finances. And as you'll see, that was a 30-year lesson in the making.
This chapter I found very interesting, the responsibility of beauty, because she is very self-aware about beauty and its implications and its privileges. She talks about a comment that she got on Instagram where they wrote, easy for you to complain about the system now that you aren't an it girl, but you had no problem making millions of dollars, enjoying your celebrity, and making millions of young girls feel ugly and unworthy for decades. Now you're aware of how fragile self-image is. You played a big role in creating a machine that makes people feel worthless if they aren't magazine beautiful, and now you're crying because the system is making you feel the way you made everyone else feel. The hypocrisy is incredible.
So she's like, I see this from time to time, and it makes me think of a question she was asked when she was 20 years old and she signed the biggest, at the time, contract ever in modeling with Estee Lauder. What is the responsibility of beauty? She tapped her pen on her notepad, clarifying, for example, would you sell furs or say blood diamonds?
The truth was, her question also shamed me. I'd become a model at 15 and made a great deal of money because people thought I was beautiful. I was also an arrogant asshole. Give a teenager loads of money, no rules, and lavish praise for her ability to look stunning and fit into sample-sized clothing, and moral responsibility probably isn't what she spends most of her days thinking about.
So then she talks about how when you buy something beautiful, what you want is for it to stay the same. And that's the problem with like the objectification of women is we get so mad at them when they change and age that you want what you bought. You want perfect, unchanging beauty, but women are people, not objects, so they have to change.
Yeah, and then she goes into having not always felt beautiful when she was younger, when she was getting bullied in school. They always called her ugly, and then suddenly she was a fashion model, and as soon as she became a fashion model, they were like, oh, and now you're stupid. And this happened over and over again, where she was very bookish when she was getting bullied all the time. And then as soon as she became known for her looks, all of a sudden nothing she said mattered. And she wanted people to know that she was intelligent. Today, beauty may be seen as a gift, but it's also ambiguous and contradictory. It's subjective. While a woman seeing a photo of me in an ad might have felt shame for not looking like me, I had been shamed for not having the body of Elle Macpherson and the boobs of Sidney Crawford and the teeth of Christy Brinkley. When the standard you're being held to is physical perfection, none of us can compete. And so she was jealous of other models. People were jealous of her. And then she would like be mean. She said, I cut other women down in my mind so I could feel superior or at least equal.
Being in possession of beauty is a privilege. There's an undeniable power in it. In general, the world responds more positively to beauty. Doors open a little faster, a little wider. Choosing to engage in the maintenance or manufacture of beauty, choosing to wear makeup or dye your hair or wear fashionable clothes. These are things we choose to do to access a little of that privilege. But it's not our responsibility to be beautiful. It's a gift we give ourselves since society celebrates it. And if we are born with the right attributes at the right time and in the right place to be called beautiful, we are not responsible for the gifts handed to us, but we are responsible for how we use them. And she's like, today, I'm much more aware of what I would use my looks to sell. I would not do blood diamonds or fur, for example. And she's like, on my Instagram, I try to be very honest about the things I use and don't use because I don't want to use my privilege to falsely shill stuff. But she's like, anybody at the end of the day who is buying moisturizer or lipstick is playing a part in conferring that privilege upon me. This is just how the system works. We both perpetuate it by participating.
We capture beauty when we see it. We try to make that perfect, beautiful moment live on forever by putting it on a song or a canvas or in dance. We try to own beauty, but it cannot be owned. Beauty is like love in that way. It's a feeling, not an object. It's an adjective, not a noun. Beauty is not responsible for your reaction to it. You are responsible for your own reaction when experiencing beauty. The responsibility of beauty is not in the beheld, it's in the eye of the beholder. And this I found fascinating. And I don't know that I entirely agree, but I almost agree, I think.
I definitely think there is something to this idea that some 19-year-old girl who was told, like, you can share a room with your dad and his new girlfriend, or you can sign this multi-million-dollar contract. It's a lot to ask of her to be like, what is fair in the consumerism beauty world? I remember feeling that way about Bella Hadid, like kind of feeling bad for her when she was getting so much pressure to talk openly about the plastic surgery she got. Even Kylie, like, these are kids. These are still teenagers who are coming to age in the public eye through no fault of their own, through the choices of their parents, who are like figuring out themselves and also being asked to speak publicly and to an entire like worldwide audience about the choices they're making before they've even had time to consider or live in them. And I do think it comes back to the earlier essay, which I do think was better, of why does the fashion industry obsessed with youth? It's not because it's necessarily better looking from an objective standpoint. It's because they're less likely to say no.
Yeah.
I think Bella Hadid has said, I wish I hadn't gotten the nose job I got that got rid of like my Palestinian heritage. Granted, she's had two. So one of those nose jobs she regrets. But I do think asking a 19-year-old, what's your responsibility? No one's asking the CEO.
Exactly.
The adult.
This is kind of an interesting look about like what is the responsibility of celebrity. Because there is this idea of like, well, when you have a large platform, you should want to use it in a certain way. But if we don't feel that someone is using it in that way, like it kind of is to the people to be like, well, then why do we continue to look to this platform if we don't think that it's responsibly using its platform? But on the other hand, I don't really love it when beautiful people do these things being like, you don't understand, there's other struggles. Like, people don't think I'm smart. I'm like, okay, well, no one thinks women are smart. That's just like kind of universal for all of us. Like when M. Rada in her book was like, you don't understand, I'm beautiful, so people sexually harass me. And I'm like, yeah, same. You don't actually have to be beautiful for men to belittle you. You just have to be a woman.
We're all lucky and equal in that way. She has an essay about being famous, which I thought was interesting. To be famous is to be in a bubble. The outer surface of the bubble is reflective, mirrored. It means that when people look at someone famous, they don't usually see the person inside the bubble, they see themselves. We assume that being famous means everybody knows you, but in fact, being famous means that nobody knows you. Instead, people project their own assumptions, ideas, and desires onto you, and the real you is lost to their illusions of who they want you to be. It's why they won't ever know you. As a child who had been abandoned by her mother, I longed for my mother's approval and love. I wanted her, and by extension, everyone I meant, to know me and accept me. But fame made that feel almost impossible. I thought that this was a good condensed, what is the word I'm looking for?
Condensed version?
Yeah, of like what we see in every memoir.
Yeah.
Like there's that initial core wound of like wanting to be loved and wanting to be accepted by someone specific. You outsource it to the entire world. But the problem is the more you're loved for the wrong reasons, like the more you have to perform.
Yeah.
And she says that's why it's easier to date another famous person because they're in their bubble too.
And then your bubbles can merge. And then maybe you two can be the only two people who know each other.
And it just feels like you have this commonality that like you both understand what it's like to live with this pressure of the self. And she's like, you know, I go out with all these regular guys. She can feel how long it takes for them to get over this idea that they're dating, this model that they might have jerked off to in Sports Illustrated 20 years ago that they saw in some magazine. And she's like, sometimes people think that they're going to burst your bubble by coming up and just saying something mean to you. Like, I'm not impressed by you. But she's like, really? The only thing you can do to get rid of the bubble is pretend it's not there.
Yeah, wait, I actually want to read that line. She says, there are people who will walk up to you and instead of asking for an autograph will tell you what they think is wrong with you. While these barbed comments can sometimes sting, they don't burst the bubble. Ultimately, it's clear that the insults are like the compliments. Just the other person projecting their inner world onto you. So my choice is between sitting in my bubble with my really nice wallpaper and ignoring the outside world, which I can see but not touch, or using the megaphone I've been given. I'd rather be lonely with a purpose than lonely without a purpose. Since I have the amplified voice of fame, I use it to talk about things that matter to me.
Okay, so this is where she does say that basically it'd be impossible for her to not be famous unless she moved to Siberia or something. And I'm like, I don't think that's true because I wouldn't have known you unless you had put out this book and then specifically promoted it.
Yeah, I think that if she was in the hallway of our studio right now,
I would say, oh my God, there's a really beautiful woman out there.
That's what I was going to say is I would be like, this woman just walked by who is the most gorgeous woman I've ever seen. How random.
Even Rick Ocasek, me and Ashley were discussing this before, and she was like, it's just a you thing. And I'm like, no. If you walked by almost any high school in America, I can guarantee they wouldn't know who he was.
I guess I also feel like because he has such a specific like physicality, you'd be like, he's a famous person.
Yeah, but I think if he was walking down the Lower East Side, you just go, there's another old dude from the Lower East Side.
Yeah.
His physicality is like he's tall and wears black.
This next essay is about the days after Rick dying, when her brother was the first person to ask her kind of about how she was feeling about the whole will situation that she had been adamantly cut out of.
Yeah. I've been told of my husband's last wishes the day after his death by his best friend and manager, Jeff, but indirectly, mysteriously. We were talking on the phone about the funeral. Jeff and his wife were going to fly into LaGuardia. Then suddenly, mid-sentence about renting a car, Jeff blurted out, "You'll be fine, don't worry, you'll be fine." I briefly wondered why he sounded so insistent, so apologetic.
So then she talks about getting the envelope with his will that says specifically, "I will make no provisions for my wife because she abandoned me." Abandoned. This was a mistake. Someone had made a mistake. Surely I would get a phone call. Someone would contact me to clarify. Rick had not said that. I clearly had not abandoned him.
So ultimately, she got their 2 houses and his pension plan. I wonder what pension plan, like what union would he have been a part of?
I don't know.
But the houses, I guess, were like mortgaged to the hilt. In 2015, they had tried to sell their Gramercy Park townhouse for $15 million, taking it off the market when they couldn't get that price. And she ultimately had to like sell it in essentially a fire sale at the beginning of the pandemic for $10 million.
Yeesh. I knew that I would figure out a way to survive financially. The worst part was that he had publicly declared that I abandoned him.
So when she went to court, she basically had to fight her former business manager, which was his business manager, because all of their business stuff was obviously tied up together, their financials. And then also she was technically going against her own sons and stepsons, because that's who the estate was created for.
Grief and betrayal consumed me, and there was no room to feel anything else. When I managed to pocket the devastation, I'd feel angry. When I suppressed the anger, my sorrow climbed out of my pocket and threatened to smother me.
And so she talks about how hard it was to get out of the grief and how nobody really gave her time to heal. I wonder if that's because people thought she should get over it because it was technically her ex-husband. She'd been separated, but they were still living together.
I also feel like because there was so much anger tied up in it, people didn't understand the grief.
Yeah.
Like he had publicly stated, like, she abandoned me. We were abandoned from each other. If you look it up, she is very much referred to in Wikipedia and on the internet as his estranged wife.
She compares grief to food poisoning. The pressure of trying to be fine made me feel like a stuffed doll. It was like when someone knocks on the door of the bathroom while you're still suffering food poisoning, asking when you'll be done. She also says what he did to her in his will had me asking, how could I have been so naive, so stupid? How was I so wrong about the past 30 years of my life? So wrong about our love, so wrong about Rick. There was no article out there about the grief that I was experiencing. I had complicated grief, but nobody else had any books or articles or anything about what happens when you're both like grieving and devastated and betrayed.
She also brings up a really difficult part of grief, especially complex grief. The side effects of grieving and suppressing anger, something that is rarely talked about and frankly never accepted or even tolerated, but is inevitable, is a sort of self-focus that can be interpreted as selfishness. People get frustrated by your desire to stay in the bathroom. You know that you're still poisoned, liable to fall sick at any moment, but no one else seems to remember that. You can't get away from the pain. Your world has shrunk to contain only you. It is such a difficult place to be where you're dealing with something so immense that you really just don't have space for anyone else. Like you really can't check in on anyone else and say, how are you doing? And she's trying so hard to be there for her sons. She's trying so hard to like still exist in the world, but her world has collapsed in on itself. I mean, how many people have you known who are grieving where like at a certain point, you're just like, I don't know what to say or do anymore. It just is a part of the world now. Like this grief just exists.
So 1 year later, when I managed to sell my house, my boyfriend declared he didn't have the fortitude to stay with me. He wanted a healthy relationship, and as I watched the movers dismantle my home of 30 years, he walked away without looking back. Oof. So then she says this kind of like almost cured her betrayal because her heartbreak knocked out whatever Rick had done to her. So now all she could do was be sad, which was in a way a relief.
Heartbreak is what cured me of the pain of betrayal. It's what allowed me to become the woman I am today, a woman who understands that she has made bad choices for good reasons, a woman who has learned lessons she wishes she hadn't had to learn but is better for it, a woman who has discovered her worth by picking up the pieces of her broken heart, laboriously sewing it back together piece by piece, and in the process making it bigger. It's not what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. It's what doesn't kill you makes your heart bigger if you let it. The process of mending your heart, you can make it better. You can cut out the assumptions and the judgment and stitch in generosity. You can rip out shame and sew in self-acceptance. Then you can stuff the whole lot with love and embroider it with gratitude. That's really nice.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like that's something you can use. I could use sometime.
So she talks about the heartbreak of leaving this guy. And I think it's so interesting because she's in her 50s. And she's like, nobody really respects a broken heart in your 50s. They respect grief because that feels serious and that feels adult. But after your teenage years and your 20s, everybody's like, what do you mean you're heartbroken? Grow up.
It's such a weird thing because we prioritize love and relationships so heavily in our society. But there is this like weird thing where if you haven't figured it out by your like early 30s, people are like, okay, what are you talking about? Like you're supposed to find a partner, but if you experience heartbreak or anything like that, it's just not like an adult topic of conversation.
So her experience was essentially she had fallen in love with this man at 19 and he loved her in a way that did not allow her to have a self. And so here she is in her 50s for the first time going on dates and seeing what actual true love is and not just like adoration and obsession and ownership. I think by the end she feels very owned by Rick. What real love could look like. And the first man who shows interest, she kind of dives in heads first. And she says, for over 2 years, I kept swimming and colliding into rocks. The man I had fallen madly in love with was generous, kind, and wonderful to his children and very funny. But our understanding of love was different. He often told me if we don't work out, I'll be sad but not devastated. I chose not to believe him. Instead, I just thought I needed to keep swimming until I could reach a place where I'd no longer run into obstacles. So then, of course, even though he had always been telling her, it's not that deep for me, it's not that deep for me, he abandons her. At kind of the lowest moment of her life, she's losing her home.
Yeah, I should have known that if you can't break someone's heart, maybe they don't have a heart to break. Oof.
And I think going from Rick, where it was so tumultuous, so all in, so all or nothing, to going to somebody steady, it felt maybe calmer. But she was still like, I don't know, I still want to be loved passionately. I want to be loved deeply. I want to be important to somebody.
Yeah. While the physical pain of grief feels like a tall, strong, cold person gripping you from behind, arms crossed over your chest and forcing your air out, the pain of heartbreak is more immediate. It's someone plunging their hand into your chest, taking a hold of your heart and crushing it between their fingers. Oof.
So she goes, I read every book on heartbreak to try to distract myself, to try to make myself feel better. And she said only 2 pieces of advice really came away and helped. One was change their name in your phone so that when they text you, you see their flaws. So she changed her ex's name to Mr. Emotionally Unavailable. And then 2, it came from a Buddhist book. When you feel the pain, instead of thinking about what caused it, think about where you feel it. Where does it start? How does it feel? Observing the pain gave me respite from thinking about the cause of the pain. I noticed that the pain formed in my chest and radiated up to my throat, back of my mouth, and my nose to spill over into my eyeballs. He had destroyed me. He destroyed the 19-year-old starry-eyed teenager who believed in love conquering all. He destroyed all the signposts I thought I had learned in life. The man I loved left me to drown to save himself. But instead of perishing, I found I could still breathe. He destroyed the girl I was and left something remarkable in her place, a woman. It's interesting because I feel like the Rick thing, like this seems to have really changed her more than that did.
Okay, I feel like I have had this happen to me and I have friends that it's happened to where you're in a long relationship and then you break up and you're like, not great, but then you go into something else way too quickly. And when that ends, it like fucks you up.
Yeah.
And I think that this might have had something to do with that. I also feel like because Rick died, even though she has anger about the betrayal, I don't know that she's interested in having anger about the reality of their relationship.
I feel that way too. It's so weird. They had chosen to separate. They weren't fully divorced. They were still friends, but clearly it had its ups and downs. And then he died suddenly.
Whereas when you read about this relationship as a reader, I'm very angry with him because this was a pretty controlling and bad relationship, honestly.
Yeah.
This chapter is really interesting where she is acknowledging herself in this relationship as almost a 19-year-old because at 19 years old, she entered a relationship where she was, it seems like pretty emotionally unfulfilled and like the rest of her life was stunted because of it. She didn't have any friends. She worked a lot less.
Yeah.
Like her world kind of closed in and she seemed to kind of not develop as much for a long time.
So then we get to this chapter, which I found so interesting, called Real Money. And it was about how much money she made modeling. The most money was in ad campaigns. But to get them, you had to do editorial work for basically free. So most models in the 80s were doing catalogs. I don't know, she just made a lot of money right out the gate doing modeling.
After she did Sports Illustrated and then the cover, she wasn't just a pretty face. She was someone that was getting interviews and she was more of a personality that people were interested in talking to.
When I met my husband at 19, I had been living on my own for 4 years, but had always had someone else, either an agency or a business manager, taking care of financial concerns for me. That suited me just fine. I had learned in Sweden at the bottom of a toilet bowl that money would not make me happy, so I didn't pay attention to it.
Oof.
And then 3 years after she and Rick met, they end up sharing a business manager, so she uses his business manager and accountant.
Then they talk about getting married, and everyone, including their shared business manager and accountant, is like, you have to sign a prenup. And Rick says that's a terrible way to set up a marriage with the idea that it will not succeed. He refused to do a prenup. This man who has just finished his second divorce and is now marrying his 3-year mistress.
And so 30 years, we were embroiled in our own divorce proceedings. I thought it would be easier, at least straightforward. We would split everything half and half, right? It turns out that when you hire very expensive divorce lawyers, nothing is easy. They will try to convince each party that the other one is cheating and wants too much. Each side will spend months demanding, refusing, then finally poring over documents. It'll be very expensive, and then eventually you land in court where the judge goes, oh, you have to split it 50-50. In our case, it all became moot. Rick died early in our divorce proceedings, but left a will he had hastily signed a few weeks before major surgery. So it turns out death trumps divorce, and you get to fuck your wife over worse in death than you can in divorce.
Jesus Christ. Suddenly, I was no longer entitled to half of our joint estate, but only a third. So this confused me.
So I think the 2 houses plus the pension plan, they probably assumed that those houses were worth $25 million or something. He probably had an estate of $75 million. And if you put a house on the market for 15, I guess that's what it was assumed to be worth, even though she could only ultimately sell it for 10. But the problem was it seems like they were mortgaging those houses constantly for cash. So they didn't actually have any equity in those homes.
Okay. So they were actually worth almost nothing.
Yeah, they were more debt than they were asset.
And with no actual assets, she was broke as a joke.
Yeah, and the pension plan, she couldn't touch it for 10 more years.
Oof.
So she had truly no income. They had been living off of his royalties, she said, as day-to-day cash.
Yeah.
And she couldn't pay the tax bill and she couldn't afford the mortgage without the income. So she had to sell, but it did not leave her with too much cash.
Yikes.
Because they had been mortgaging it.
And then she talks about how because they had been using his business manager, his accountant, his everything, she made a lot of money as a model, but she was never really aware of it. And they always operated under the guise of he is the breadwinner. And she's like, looking back, I'm pretty sure I brought in a pretty equal income because when my career started to fall off when I was in my 40s, our lifestyle changed. Without my income, things were substantially different.
And not only that, but she was making a huge income. And also he was controlling. When I accepted a modeling or acting assignment, I had to make sure it didn't conflict with Rick's work schedule or his sensibilities. Some of the work I was offered was just too stupid or humiliating for me to do, Rick would decree, such as any movie with a love scene and most modeling jobs. Initially, I objected. My pulchritude made me nearly the same amount of money as my husband's talent. But eventually I realized that my autonomy was the price I needed to pay for happiness in my marriage. I was willing to pay it. After all, love was more important than my career.
So again, she really won't go into anger at this. And I respect it because what's the point of being angry about what could have been?
So in 2010, when she stopped modeling and they had to cut back on expenses, the children and I flew economy, though Rick continued to always fly first class. I bought no new clothes for myself and started cooking every night, even if I was working during the day and my husband had spent the day playing video games. It was somehow understood that he played to restore and replenish that fantastic place from which he created. And so it was more important for him to relax than me, who had just made pocket money with my trivial jobs.
Well, I guess that's why they got a divorce. So this idea that the estate was his, it really wasn't. The estate was built on their joint income under his name, which those girls should feel so guilty for giving her that swirly.
And so when they broke up, they wanted to do it amicably. And I think they both, this always happens where everybody's like, let's just be nice and civil and stay friends for the kids. And then somebody gets the cruelest lawyer of all time. And then the other person's like, well, now I have to get an equally cruel lawyer because what the fuck? And that always happens. And then it gets so vicious that I think they ultimately fired both lawyers and said, we're just going to do it amicably. And then before they could finish, he died.
Man, those lawyers should also feel ashamed of themselves. You're no better than a swirly girl. I will never regret prioritizing my children over my career, but it turns out there is room for both.
So then she talks about how she was talking to a friend and her friend was pregnant. And she's like, yeah, my dad was a CEO, but I feel that my parents took on the parenting equally. And she's like, really? But your mom was a stay-at-home mom and your dad was a CEO and you think they equally parented you? And she's like, yeah, totally. And then she asks her kids, she goes, do you feel that the parenting in this house was equal? And they're like, totally. And she's like, wait, but Rick worked the whole time and I didn't. And I will say here, she does not factor in sexism and the uneven expectation of mother versus father. Objectively, there is no way that those parents were parenting equally if he was working full-time and she was a stay-at-home mom.
Yeah.
How could that be possible?
It's not.
But the bias will always be in favor of the father. But that leaves her wondering, oh, why did I think I had to choose? Maybe I could have kept working. I will say I love the conclusion. I don't know if the work is right. I do think if you want to work, you're allowed to work as a mother. But I do think this idea that you would not have then been some way held responsible in a way that men are not is silly. To be like, wait, you're not mad at your dad for working? Then you wouldn't be mad at me. No.
Yeah.
That's not how it ever works.
I guess the difference here is that I think because it would have been like one weekend a month for a fuck ton of money, I wonder how different it would have felt if she was working.
So she says if she could change anything, yes, I wish I had signed a prenup. I wish I had kept my money separate. I wish I had kept working more. But most of all, I wish I hadn't handed over the purview of me to someone else. I trusted my husband. I trusted him to steer me in the right direction in every way to the point of self-abnegation. I gave up work, friends, and even my likes and dislikes for his love. And I learned the hard way that to nullify yourself means that when you most need yourself, you may not even know who you are. I had made choices and now I was seeing the consequences.
I wonder if there should be a legal age, not a legal age to marry, but like a legal age to have met the person you're going to marry. To the 19-year-old who wrote that Cut article, I guess she was 27, but she met her husband at 20. It's not your fault. You just don't know.
Recently, if you don't know what we're talking about, we talked about it on the Patreon. There was a Cut article about this woman who at 20 met her husband who's 10 years older than her and how she loves the way that he just tells her how to live her life and has money and she doesn't have to have a job or a self because he can just tell her and it's actually going great.
Because he's her mentor and sometimes her friend.
My final take was I guess I'm just not that interested in the perspective of a 27-year-old. I want to hear how it panned out overall.
And here's how it panned out overall. This was obviously a very different situation, but also not that different in a lot of ways.
Yeah. I mean, it was very similar.
She writes an essay about the day she found Rick. She'd been taking care of him after surgery, and she went to bring him a coffee in his room, and she found him. His eyes didn't look like eyes anymore. I knew what those eyes should look like. I knew those eyes too well. She collapses. She has to tell her children who are there.
And she says ultimately the only thing that got her through was hearing other people's similar experiences that she needed to see herself reflected in the page. I'm sharing my story to be a light for you. It's not a big light. I can't save you and I can't make this better for you, but I am holding a candle to let you know you're not alone and you will make it through this. If you are there now in the dark, rocking and mooing, know I'm your company.
So she writes an essay on courage about her severe anxiety that she's had for a long time and the different ways people view courage and how it's often extremely invisible. You can't tell when someone is being their bravest. For her, confronting situations that she is extremely anxious about, like going outside of her house, is courageous. Whereas when she poses nude, people are like, oh, that's so brave. And she's like, not really. I was raised in Europe. It's fun.
No one is born with courage. It is built over the course of a lifetime. It's not just the moments that have made your heart break or race or bleed that have made you brave. It's your response to those moments. It's your willingness to confront your pain and fear. I built my courage one subway ride at a time. You build your courage your own way by confronting your pain and fear, whether or not anyone else can see or understand them.
She brings ice on the subway in case it stops underground.
She also brings a fan and a doggy bag in case she pukes. I mean, it's crazy, but I guess it gets her out the door.
But she still goes on the subway, and that's so brave.
It's so funny because she's like, I'm taking my subway to Brooklyn to do my Sports Illustrated naked cover at 53. And I am like, okay, but why didn't they send a car for you? That feels like a really big deal. They send a car for us at comedy festivals where we make $200. Sports Illustrated doesn't have cab money. Sports Illustrated, if you need a couple dollars, call us.
Dude, don't put that out there. The magazine industry is struggling.
Surely they have an Uber.
I don't know.
They could send her an Uber pool.
I don't know.
Surely they have an intern with a car.
In New York City?
Surely they have an intern whose dad has a car.
It's so funny that she's like, I have my barf bag in case I or someone else needs to throw up.
Yeah, totally. That's always happening.
I'm proud to say I've never announced to the subway, did anyone pack a barf bag? I think I'm about to yak. Paulina? She then goes into the difference between nudity and nakedness.
Basically, in Europe, everybody's nudie patootie, so she don't give a shit. But the problem is she's been so casually naked and then other people sexualize it, and that's when she feels really shameful and taken advantage of when she's just casually being naked for fun. But then they're like, topless, Paulina, inside now. And she's like, wait a minute, that's not what I was doing. Don't sexualize me like that. She says being nude is not the same as being naked. Being nude has a purpose. It's a choice. It's choosing how you want to be seen. You're nude when you're posing for art. Being naked is being vulnerable, like when you're getting an x-ray or you're born.
Posing topless or even fully nude didn't bother me at all, but using my being topless for a major selling point felt dirty. Suddenly, I went from being carefreely nude on a sunny beach to being sold as an object of sexual desire. And after this, Rick is like, no more nudes. And then after they break up, she goes back to nuding because she's like, I love it.
And her boyfriend's like, so everyone's just going to see you naked? And she's like, yes.
Shut up.
Because not you, not the conservatives, not the Sports Illustrated. Anytime someone tells me I should or should not be naked or takes advantage or tries to control me, they're taking my body from me. And it's my body.
Yeah, bitch.
And no one can have it but me. They're not yours. They are my own. That's about nudities.
Hell yeah.
In the plural.
So she was on Lexapro for a while.
This is so funny. This is one of those real different generations. She's like, I have to tell you guys something. I'm on Lexapro.
It's solved.
Her friends are like, yeah, us too, duh. And she's like, wait, what? And she's so ashamed. And then she finds out that it's actually totally okay to be on drugs for anxiety, depression, but she doesn't really need them. She like would rather just be in pain. But it's good to know that they're, and if you use them, that's totally fine, but she's not on them.
Yeah, this was one where I was like, oh, okay, so we're not ready.
She's like, I don't know. I was at a table with 6 women in their 50s and 60s. Why was every single one of us on Lexapro? And I do think it bears the question. It seems like if everyone in society has to be medicated to handle society, something else is afoot.
Something's afoot. And she says she really didn't enjoy it. It really helped her when she was going through an extremely anxious time and she needed like a break. Her doctor was like, it's a break from your constant anxiety. Like give yourself a medically induced time to reset. But for 2 years, I learned nothing new. I felt emotionally Botoxed. She felt very removed from her creative self. She also felt 0% sexual, and that wasn't fun. And she realizes, could it be that some of these difficult feelings are growing pains? Perhaps I needed to experience those difficult times in order to get to the other side where peace and confidence will finally triumph. And, you know, I think that's a fine perspective for her to have and for her to write about her own experience.
It's just such an interesting take. I mean, it just reminds you how far we've come about normalizing for all the Twitter people who are like, let's normalize cat kinks. It's totally fine to want to fuck your cat sometimes. And if you say it's not, that's sexist and ableist. Some of us have too much anxiety to have a human-to-human relationship. So our cat is our girlfriend. So we've like come a long way. But you know, she was born in like communist Russia, man.
Czechoslovakia.
She's doing her best. Okay, so then she has a super interesting essay, which I think is like kind of the crown jewel.
I agree.
Called Occupied. And she talks about in first grade, she's entering a competition where she's writing a poem about Mother Russia and how Russia is your best friend and she loves it. And her grandma Bobby is like kind of rolling her eyes. And Paulina is stressed because she is under the strict direction that if somebody is disrespectful to their good friend Russia, the country, then you have to tell the teacher. And she does not want to tell her grandma. So she's just like, let's just keep being great citizens of Russia. And then her mom comes home and her mom is like quite literally under house arrest.
As a political prisoner.
And they buy the apartment across the street, the state. I guess they don't buy it. They just go into it to keep an eye on their mother so that they can like harass anybody who comes to visit her. All she wants is to see Lenin in his
embalmed state.
And then to become a pioneer. A pioneer is a child who achieved perfection in doing good deeds and being a good communist. So she's like very stressed about her mom and her grandma like holding her back from her greatest dream of being a perfect communist.
And then she like has this funny little part where she's like, Czechoslovakia changed hands a lot of times. We were very frequently occupied. Our country was abundant with beer and castles and was centrally situated within Europe. The only resistance any invader would face would be a couple of self-defenestrating dissenters. Honestly, why not invade us? It's a wonder we managed to hold on to any shred of national identity and language. Her mom was always trying to listen to Radio Free Europe in order to get any information or music or culture from outside of Czechoslovakia. And she's like freaking out.
I never reported Bobby or mother, but I reported other kids. Anna didn't post a flag. Lena rolled her eyes when we sang the Soviet anthem. Martina left her pioneer scarf outside in the rain. She said, but of course, reporting children wasn't the point. The point was that you were taught that it was natural and good to turn on your friends so that once we reached adulthood, you would have no qualms about turning in your colleagues at work, your best friends, or your lovers. We were indoctrinated to believe that anyone in our lives, our classmates, our friends, our partners, even our parents, were disposable. That our true parents were the state, our true family was the Communist Party. She says, this undercurrent of distrust is the most damaging part of living in a totalitarian country. No one is safe. All relationships are suspect. That is the true horror of occupation. It's not what you can see, it's what you can't. It's not the lack of shelter, the long food lines, the censorship. You are not allowed to think, for if you think oppositional thoughts, you may accidentally reveal them when you're frustrated or when you confide in a friend. And if you do, you may lose your life as you know it. Your mind, your thoughts have been invaded. It is you has been occupied.
If you can trust no one, how can you love? And how can you be loved when your thoughts are not your own?
I have by now learned that being owned is not the same as being loved, and that occupation doesn't mean that I don't need to abandon fear. Quite the contrary. When the occupier abandons their territory, what they leave behind are people who have never learned how to stand on their own.
It frightens me that the words I still long to hear are "you belong to me." I can only wish I've learned enough at my age to understand that a tank rolling into my life is not a liberator or a savior or a protector. The safety I long for doesn't come armed. What I hope for are not two countries merged into one, rather two countries with open borders. What I hope for is that I'm no longer undefended territory waiting to be occupied. So obviously, Rick steamrolled into her life and said, "You can't work, you only are mine." And like, that's what she wanted.
I just thought this was such an interesting self-reflection because it's something that we saw a lot in Julia Hart's memoir.
Yeah.
Because her parents also were like devout communists who left Russia and then became like devout Orthodox. She left Orthodoxy to like become obsessed with capitalism. And it was something that we really saw in her book, that even though they kept switching what their beliefs were, what never changed or what the constant was this belief system that is all in. That like, here's the system of how you win life. And if you are smart, you just work your hardest in any direction that you're put in. And I found it very interesting to see her make that realization because it's something that we felt we didn't see in Julia Hart.
Yeah.
Like her complete switch from going from like living as an Orthodox Jewish woman to living as a woman who's like obsessed with having sex in the highest heels and the shortest shorts.
Yeah.
That's also a really intense way to live.
Yes.
And then she has her final chapter. Every woman is beautiful, blah, 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 blah. Did you know you're beautiful?
This one was like a little bit less eye-rolly to me than most of the other books we've read with a similar chapter. She talks about this French term called jolie laide. How do you say it?
Yeah, jolie laide. Ugly hot, basically. It's like a woman who's beautiful even though she's low-key ugly. Okay, I was going to give some examples, but I
don't think it's nice. They're right in front of you, bitches. Two uggos.
No, we are not jolie laide. I feel like...
But I want to be.
Yes.
This was a really inspiring chapter to me.
Me too. I was inspired too.
I said, why am I trying to be beautiful when I can be uggo?
Yeah,
Hot.
but in like such a cool, interesting... Essentially, it's like any woman you've ever seen who you're like she's so cool by being herself.
She sees this girl, so she's obsessed with trying to become beautiful. And then she sees this girl who she views as unquestionably ugly. She had rather perplexingly taken care to highlight every one of her flaws. And she's like, why are the men fawning over her? Why am I obsessed with her? Why do I want to be her? I want her lipstick. I want her life. And she's like, oh, she is jolie laide.
Her beauty lies exactly in the fact that she is not easy to take in at first glance. Unlike smooth prettiness, a jolie laide's beauty is sharp. It wounds you a little and leaves a scar. And then she talks about the difference between pretty and beautiful. Beauty, unlike prettiness, is not dependent on smooth, reflective skin or symmetrical features. It doesn't rely on conforming with what the culture around you has deemed worthy of attention. It can be ugly if you consider ugly the opposite of pretty. It's not that beauty doesn't coexist with youth. It can, but it's not youth dependent. Real beauty is often secret, like that of the jolie laide, only discoverable with a little bit of patience.
I'm not making the tired point that everyone is beautiful on the inside. Rather, I'm making the point that everyone is beautiful on the outside. And this I found to be not condescending. She's saying you had to like be yourself and like have an identity and a sense of self, and that is beauty. Like when people have a confidence about them, it's very beautiful.
And she's saying, listen, as women get older, they become invisible, but not because they're not beautiful, because they're not pretty. Because pretty is like youth, bright, shiny, whatever, but like you're so beautiful when you are you.
Yeah.
And I think that's true. Who hasn't looked at their grandma and been like, you're so beautiful to me?
Yeah. And when someone walks in with like confidence and power, they command an energy. They command attention.
The levens between your eyebrows, they make you look like a woman of deep thought, a woman who hasn't let her life go by unnoticed. Your crow's feet, there are maps of laughter. I love the lines around your lips. Maybe you were smoking cigarettes late at night in a smoky club, or maybe you have kissed so many people in life that the kisses have etched their way onto your lips forever. The tendons in your neck look like sails that cut and navigate the winds of your life. The crepey, soft skin that gathers on your belly and on your legs and arms. Why not think of it as rumpled silk sheets in a bed in the morning? It's far more interesting than smoothly made bed. It has a history of lovemaking. But then she's like, I don't know why I can't feel that way about myself. I'm trying. I can see it in you, but I can't see it in myself.
And I love that.
Perhaps it is a matter of comparison, not between you and me, but between me and myself, me as a young, pretty woman, and me as an older woman of character. A face with character is a face that is an original work of art, a face of beauty. Either the war is against invisibility or the war for self-acceptance. In the war for self-acceptance, I have to battle myself, not to erase but to acquire confidence, self-assurance, and acceptance. I want to be seen for all that I am, the good, the bad, the beautiful.
And then finally, she has a little chapter about palm reading, which she is an expert at, and how one hand is fate and one hand is choice. And everything at the end comes down to a matter of interpretation and like how you interpret your fate and then the choices you decide to make, which I think is really nice.
She sounds really good at palm reading. And Paulina, if you're listening, read my friggin' palms. In conclusion, Ash, thoughts?
I loved it.
I liked it too. I like a book from a woman who's lived a life. I'm tired of these bitches my age. Take a step back, get some perspective. It felt very like considered, but not finite, which I always like.
Yeah, there is still room to grow. She's still, I think, 60 now. So 20 years down the line, there could be a whole new book of learnings. But she feels like always willing to discover something. Not always, actually. It seems like she was kind of arrogant and closed off for a long time. And now she's very open.
Yeah. It's a good reminder that like we're 31, 32.
That's barely anything.
Barely anything. There's so much life left. It hasn't even begun.
There could be like really important shit that isn't even on the near horizon.
How fertile would you call this soil?
You know, I would give it a 4. I think it gave me a lot to think about. Plus, her life is crazy.
Yeah, I would give it a 4 too. I feel like it was a perfect beach read. It took me like 2 hours to read. It's quick, it's easy, it's thoughtful in an uplifting way, but I also wouldn't, it's not like philosophy. It's not hard.
Yeah.
You're not going back and double reading sentences. You get it.
No, but as like a woman who exists in the world, I think that there's a lot to pick from here.
I would love to see her in conversation with Emrata. Maybe I'll put it together.
Yeah, this is definitely what that book hopefully could be someday.
And then how many worm teenies would you like to have with our girl Paulina?
Oh, 5 out of 5. I want to read my palm. I want to have a little chat. I just want to like hang out.
Yeah, I think she'd be a great hang.
Well, thanks, guys. And especially thank you to our 5-star reviewing Wormitas.